Hello and welcome to MindGourmet. My name is Nina Kaiser. I'm the co-founder of MindGourmet and, as always, your host today. My today's guests are Harvard psychiatrists and psychoanalysts Jackie and Richard, the developers of the first wearable sunlight tracker called SunSprite. Welcome, Jackie and Richard. Thank you for being my guests.
Wonderful.
It's a pleasure. A pleasure. Thank you.
Well, I thank you. And before we dive into our conversation about sunlight and the SunSprite, I want to introduce you a little more to our audience. Dr. Jacqueline Olds and Dr. Richard Schwartz are both psychiatrists and psychoanalysts who are married to each other and have collaborated over many years. They are each associate clinical professor of psychiatry at Harvard Medical School and are actively involved in the training and mentoring of psychiatry residents and medical students in the MGH McLean Hospital residency program, both of them in adult psychiatry and Jackie in child psychiatry as well. Both Jackie and Richard are on the faculties of the Boston Psychoanalytic Institute and Society and the Psychoanalytic Family and Couples Institute of New England. They serve on the editorial board of the Harvard Review of Psychiatry, and each of them spent many years as editors of the Clinical Challenges section. They have written numerous articles published in professional journals and 3 books for general audiences: Overcoming Loneliness in Everyday Life, Marriage in Motion, the Natural Ebb and Flow of Lasting Relationships, and most recently, The Lonely American, Drifting Apart in the 21st Century. As an extension of their interest in addressing social disruptions of the natural conditions that maintain good mental health, they have also more recently been concerned with the effect of circadian rhythm and light, developing the first wearable tracker to monitor and dose bright light therapy for the treatment of depression and other conditions. The device named SunSprite is named SunSprite and has been on the market since 2014. I think many people suffer from emotional imbalances and low energy levels and sleep disturbances. And at least to me, it appears that so often the decision to take medication is made very fast. But it has actually been always on my radar, but diving deeper into your work and the SunSprite, it really I got more conscious about the fact that we have one essential, very available component in our life that influences our well-being, which is sunlight. So can you tell us a little bit more about the effects of bright light on the human brain?
Sure. For us as psychiatrists, it started with an awareness of how much bright light makes a difference in treating depression, which was something that probably most of humanity has been vaguely aware of for eons, but really emerged as something in psychiatry in the 1980s, when it was first shown that depression in the winter could be treated by having bright light in the morning on a daily basis. And what has emerged in the following decades is that that bright light treatment in the morning works as well as medication for depression, and as a remarkably safe and side effect-free way of treating depression. And also that over the last few decades, circadian rhythm itself, the natural rhythms of our body as dictated by the day and night cycle of the sun, turns out to be so important in all aspects of health, but particularly brain health.
Yeah, and so let's say we have an optimal world and we can spend our days in the optimal way. What would be the best way to get our sunlight exposure for optimal well-being? Like when and how and where?
Okay, well, that's such a good question, and many patients have wanted to know all the details, and our wearable tracker sort of gets people in the habit of doing it properly. But basically, if it's a dark day, you need often to sit in front of an artificial bright light, which they sell on the web and in a few stores. And it has to be quite bright, and you have to do it within an hour and a half of waking up. And you need to be usually within about 18 inches of the bright lamp. And this means that you have to sit still for half an hour when you first wake up, which is quite hard on many people because they get all ready for going to work, and it's kind of usually a rush. And so the meditative sitting in front of a bright light is hard to achieve. But people who have depression often can do it because they're so motivated to get rid of this depression. And if it's a sunny day, taking a walk and getting the exposure to bright light through the sun is a better way, because you both get the exercise, you don't have to sit in a particular position in relation to an artificial bright light, and it's the way humanity was meant to live. So if you do that within an hour and a half of waking up, even, doesn't matter if you wake up at 7 a.m. or 11 a.m., you should do it within that time frame. And if you get it late in the day, there is the danger that that huge amount of bright light, if you get it at 6 p.m., will actually keep you awake so that you can't fall asleep at your bedtime. So really the bright light first thing in the morning is important.
Yeah, and what you've been saying, Jackie, and also you, Richard, about the circadian rhythm is something I've been thinking a lot about recently, because it's almost like it feels like we cannot really follow it anymore, for example, because there's so much artificial light. So we get up at weird times, we go to bed at weird times, we have all those lights going on. Some even call it light pollution. Yeah. So if we now combine the fact that we need to we have to expose ourselves to the bright light, sunlight, to be healthy and well, would you say that all those artificial lights actually make it harder to be okay with our light exposure overall?
Those artificial lights make it harder in two ways. There are two things about artificial lights. One is that we have them at night in a way that most of humanity never was faced with light at night, and that makes us sleep less well, that has many effects disrupting our physiology. It's been shown that too much exposure to disruptive light at night is bad for cardiac health, bad for obesity, diabetes, some cancers, as well as our mental health. But also, artificial light sort of tricks us during the day, because it's so much less bright than the sun that, particularly in terms of treating depression, the ordinary bright lights that we are exposed to in offices, in our kitchens, in our homes, is so much less bright than the sun that it doesn't pass the threshold of actually treating depression if you are getting depressed. Yeah. In a way sunlight does, which is why you need these strange artificial light boxes if you're going to get sunlight equivalent light. We're really good at being able to judge relative brightness and darkness, and our eyes adapt so well to different levels of intensity. But that means we're not very good at telling how absolutely bright it is. And we think we're in a bright artificial light, and it actually is very dark compared to sunlight.
And I remember when I made my first experiments with the SunSprite, I used the SunSprite and the app in every corner of my house to find out where are actually the darkest and the lightest places. And this room where I'm in right now, I actually always considered a room with lots of light. And then I found out that, for example, now it has 0.4 current intensity. So I was blown away thinking, I'm working here all the time and it's actually dark. So I moved to a big window on the ground floor, and seriously, I felt a lot better working, and I wouldn't have thought that before. And so I think it's super helpful to be able to find out how much light you actually get, and that actually brings us right to this beautiful little thing called SunSprite. And so how did the idea to create that appear? How did you invent it? How did it come to you?
Well, we talked it over on a trip in Europe, actually. And we talked it over because we had read articles and noticed in our own practices that the side effects of the antidepressants sometimes outweigh the benefits. Every now and then, when somebody finds that they're gaining weight and they've lost their enjoyment of sexual activity, that is huge compared to, well, not, they hate depression too, but basically the side effects can be so heavy and so bad for people. And we were thinking, as the research came out about bright light curing depression, that is such a marvelous thing, that here is this absolutely obvious natural effect that we as people are supposed to be getting, and that in the past people didn't worry about getting it because they were always outside. And in our indoor life, we forget. We have heard from people in Arizona and New Mexico and all sorts of places where the light is fantastic, that they just don't get outdoors much. And so we thought, well, how can we remind people to get outdoors, as well as helping them to know when they got the right amount of bright light? And so the SunSprite came to be. We were all in the world of Fitbits, where people are measuring their steps and measuring their exercise. And we thought, well, why not measure the amount of bright light that your eyes are getting? Because this effect, the antidepressant effect, comes through the eyes. The bright light hits your eyes and affects the melanopsin cells in the back of your eye, and that both decreases melatonin, so you feel more wide awake, and it increases serotonin, which is exactly what all those antidepressant medicines do.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah,
that was how it came to be.
And then did you like search for people who could develop it for you and test it with all your friends and relatives?
We immediately went to a good friend of ours who teaches electronics in the Harvard physics department and teaches physicists how to actually build things. And we said, hey, could we do this? And he said, sure.
So he was one of our founders.
Yeah.
And we had another engineer, and then we had to test it just as you say and see whether it really worked. And it was a very complicated business, considering that we thought it would be really simple.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. The sure turned out to be just a first step to something that was kind of complicated to do.
I often think it's good to know that we don't know that before we embark on new adventures, because otherwise many beautiful inventions probably wouldn't really be invented.
Exactly.
So how does one use the SunSprite for optimal benefit? I can show my app and my SunSprite to help show it. So how do we do that?
So basically, you wear it facing the same direction as your eyes. And you can wear it as a pendant if you wanted. We have actually something that was designed for our SunSprite that can make it into a pendant.
Mm-hmm.
Basically, as long as it's facing the same direction as your eyes face, then it will know how much bright light your eyes are getting. And so many people put it on first thing in the day so that they can remind themselves and measure how much light they're getting in that first hour and a half. And if ever they're curious about whether it's really getting enough bright light, it has a way, it tells you by pushing this little button that here I've gotten about 60% of my bright light for the day. But essentially it has a flashing light that tells you when the light is bright enough. So
I think mine flashes, right? Is it this one?
That you got plenty of bright light.
Yes.
But also sometimes when you begin, there's just one at the top and one at the bottom. And if one of those is flashing back and forth, that means the light is bright enough to start registering and filling up.
If you want to get technical, that bright enough from many studies of mood and light is something called 2500 lux, which is a measure of how bright light is at your eye. And anything below that doesn't help with depression. Anything above that does. And as it gets brighter, the amount of time that you need to spend in the light decreases, but it never gets less than half an hour.
So usually you try to wear this thing when you're either walking or sitting in front of your bright light until all the little lights fill up. And then you can be sure, if you have a smartphone, that your smartphone will tell you that you got the right amount, and will also remind you if you happen to be in midday sunshine, it will give you the UV index so that you know whether to put on sunscreen.
Mm-hmm. And it also shows the activity over the course of a week, which I find very interesting. So just to see and to be able to remember how we feel and how we lived our days. But if I understand it correctly, we have to really look into the light, right? So maybe not directly in the sun, but I was wondering if I do get mostly my sunlight outside in the garden, or I take a walk. So I shouldn't actually close my eyes, right? I should keep them open.
That's
Especially
absolutely
when
right. Yeah. And that's important, because even people who understand the importance of light often think that it's an effect on the skin through vitamin D, which of course is important in its own way. But this particular effect on mood and attention and alertness is an effect directly through the eyes. As Jackie said, it affects special receptor cells in the eyes that are not for vision, but for an awareness of light and dark, that goes to an area of the brain that essentially sets our daily rhythms. And so it has to be entering through your eyes. It doesn't work if your eyes are closed.
Mm-hmm.
If the light is marginal, it doesn't work if you have sunglasses on. But you don't want to look at the light, as you know, certainly with the sun, you don't want to look at light, but it's unpleasant staring at any bright light. It just has to enter your eyes. So
you can do it at an angle.
Okay.
You want some version of the way you are actually often in relation to the sun. The sun is up there, you're looking out into the world. The light is entering your eyes, but you're not looking directly at it. But if it's completely behind you, that doesn't do.
Although if it's a very sunny day and it's completely behind you, it doesn't really matter, because on those very sunny days, your SunSprite will tell you you're getting enough bright light.
Yeah, and just from the whole ambient light. But if you're using a light box, then basically you have to be aware of it in your eye, but not staring at it. You can be reading your book, looking at your computer screen, talking to your partner in the morning, but the light has to be somewhere in your field of vision. It's also worth mentioning that the early morning sunlight is good in two ways. It's when light is most effective for setting your circadian rhythm, for treating depression, but it's also when ultraviolet light is low. Ultraviolet light is much more sensitive to the angle of the sun. So it gets high in the middle of the day and is low close to dawn and dusk. So that's a time that is also safer for your eyes, because ultraviolet light, when it's bright over a lifetime, can increase cataract formation. But if you're getting your bright light early in the morning, you're not exposing yourself to significant amounts of ultraviolet light.
I was actually surprised how little ultraviolet light exposure we have when we are outside. It's mostly at noon that my SunSprite app said 1 or 2 maybe, but otherwise it felt totally okay and safe. And anyway, I think maybe that's just how I feel it, that we got far too cautious about being outside and in the sun. And I was wondering, because I remember after one walk, my SunSprite app told me I had about 400 and something % of sunlight, and I felt like that's actually a really good thing. Is it, or can I get too much? I mean, I know I can get sunburned if I lie in the sun, but I was actually taking a walk and I felt very well.
Most people don't have to worry about getting too much. Occasionally a person with a tendency toward bipolar illness might get manicky if they get a huge amount of bright light. Or they might have, if they're prone to insomnia, they might get too much bright light if they got it at 4 p.m. So at some times you don't want to overdo it. But mostly, if it's first thing in the morning and you get 400%, more power to you. Yeah.
Most of people throughout history have spent most of their time in bright sunlight, and that's fine. Yeah, but coming back to your low levels of ultraviolet light, except at noon, that's very sensitive to how far north or south you are. As you come closer to the equator, the amount of time that there's significant ultraviolet light spreads out through the day. So that is still worth keeping track of.
Yeah. I think the SunSprite, so I approached it from probably a different point, because I was very curious about what actually is my relationship to sunlight, where compared to somebody who maybe to help with their light therapy uses it to measure the amount of light they get. But I really think that for everybody who is actually interested in how they maneuver themselves in the world, be it with, I mean, you said many people track their steps because they want to have healthy movement, and others do their food logs, tracking what they eat. I think it's a brilliant idea to have a look at these basic things like sunlight. And I love the SunSprite. I'm really happy I have it. And I can seriously say that it contributed a lot to my understanding about where to be when I'm indoors, and what actually feels, I kind of got a little feeling of how much is enough, which I didn't have before. And so,
well, you're so
yeah.
nice to say
We're
that.
so happy to hear that.
You are so nice. And you know, for psychiatry is a little bit of a sedentary indoor profession too.
Yes.
We would love if all
We're trapped inside a lot of
if
the
we
time.
could do all our psychotherapy while walking, but it's not possible. So in fact, we have often noted long before the SunSprite existed that when we got to go on a walk in the middle of the day or early in the day, the whole day went better.
Mm-hmm.
You just feel more alive and more focused and more sharp.
Mm-hmm.
And so it doesn't seem to us now that we have been paying attention to light that is only for people with depression.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it increases your lightness and aliveness during the day to start it with some bright light. Yeah.
So I'm sorry, no, you first.
I was just going to say, it's a shame that nowadays we have to remind ourselves of something so basic. And the people who have dogs and cats, by the way, and want to walk them, or cats don't often put up with being walked, but people who have dogs and walk their dogs automatically get some bright light first thing in the day. Oftentimes it's a quick 10-minute walk because they're in such a rush. And the people who take public transportation and have a bus stop that's 25 minutes away have a tremendous advantage too. So there are ways you can engineer your life so that you automatically include getting some sunlight exposure.
Although, as you mentioned before we started, driving in a car often with the light coming in through the windshield works as well. Since this is visible light we're talking about, windows don't take it away.
Yeah.
And I mean, many people commute, so maybe they even though they think they don't get enough sunlight, maybe they even do.
Yeah.
And so from your perspective, is there anything else that's important that I didn't ask or mention, because you are much more expert on sunlight and emotions and well-being? What else is needed to be said?
Well, first of all, so many people are, I would say, a little bit over-concerned about their weight. But given that everybody is thinking about weight a lot of the time, having a stable circadian rhythm matters immensely if you want to stay at a stable weight. You don't want to keep gaining. And it turns out that if you eat in a 12-hour arc, let's say your breakfast is at 7:30, and you eat your supper before 7:30 in the evening. If you eat in that 12-hour arc, you're much less likely to gain weight than if you eat late at night, long after, like at 10:30. Now, it turns out if you've got a stable circadian rhythm, eating sort of in that arc is a lot easier. And then you might feel like going to sleep at 10:30 because you got your bright light at 7:30. And so that circadian rhythm data is starting to imply that it is related to obesity, that you can prevent it if you have a good circadian rhythm. And the people who get diabetes from gaining too much weight are much more likely to have a very unstable circadian rhythm. And so this is a way they can straighten that rhythm out.
Yeah, and there are some studies that show that people who get early morning bright light have lower BMIs, body mass indexes. And there are a couple of small studies that showed that people who were trying to lose weight were better able to do that if they also got early morning bright light. So it is related to that. Actually, another thing that's related to probably is attention deficit disorder. There's some evidence that adolescents with attention deficit disorder have disturbed circadian rhythms. There's a really intriguing study that used satellite data of amount of sunshine and found that where there is more sunshine, there are fewer diagnoses of ADHD. And so it may be a factor in attention and attention deficit disorder, which, as you know, is seems to be expanding in the world, and maybe the absence of regular rhythms of light has something to do with that.
Maybe. Mm-hmm. And I think that is extremely encouraging. I mean, and maybe that says my ex-elementary teacher heart. Because before I embarked on my MindGourmet adventure, I actually taught elementary school for 20 years. And you know how it is with ADD and ADHD. I mean, apart from the problems those things cause in the classroom, it's just so hard to see those kids dealing with that. And well, had I known that already years ago, I would have had one more recommendation to give.
The parents, that they should let their children, they should walk their children to school, or they should let them play outside for half an hour before school. And in the schools where they do let children play for half an hour before class, the children seem better able to concentrate. And I guess as older people in America, we're so sorry that the amount of recess has gone down so much. With the tremendous emphasis on academic subjects, the children report that they're getting less and less recess.
Actually, this is related to psychiatry, but one of the intriguing things going on, there is an epidemic of nearsightedness in East Asia. And there's been some speculation that that's the result of children spending so much time inside studying and doing homework and having little time outside. So there have been a couple of studies done, I think one of them was in Taiwan, where they randomized young children in elementary school to a half an hour of recess where they were forced to play outside, and just recess as usual where people tended to stay inside. And at the end of a year of having to play outside during recess, there were many fewer new cases of nearsightedness developing at a time when children are often at risk for developing myopia. So it turns out our eyes, as they're developing, actually are better off if they're exposed to bright light.
Sorry, what did you say, Jackie?
I said our eyes need outdoor time to be out in the sun. So that was completely out in left field. We knew nothing about that. When we read about it, we were blown away.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And doesn't it like come up again and again when we think about all those things, that we became quite artificial creatures? Maybe not we ourselves, but, you know, wondering what is actually really natural for us human beings became a real question.
Yes, right.
And still is.
Yeah.
I agree. That is such a good point. And, you know, all those mothers throughout the centuries who used to say, just go outside in the sun and play. They were totally right.
Yeah. So for everybody who would like to know more about you and your work and the SunSprite, where can they go? What can they do?
Well, there are many ways nowadays of reaching people, but first of all, if on our website, the SunSprite website, support@SunSprite gets you right to Richard and me. So that's number one, support@sunsprite.com. And for my personal email, that's N as in Nancy, M as in Marie, J as in Jackie Olds, nmjolds@gmail.com.
And mine is schwartzrs@gmail.com.
So that would get our attention.
And we will
check our emails about 23 times a day.
And I will make sure that we'll link to everything and list everything that's important right below this interview so that everybody who wants to can find you. And so I would like to thank you.
Such wonderful questions. Thank you so much. I think your idea of MindGourmet, where we get to talk about why bright light matters and you get to talk to so many other interesting people, is a superb idea.
Thank you. Thank you. This is really, that's very, very beautiful feedback. And I'm thanking you from my heart for taking the time to be here with me now. And I so enjoyed our conversation, really. Thank you for it.
Well, thank you for asking.
So, goodbye, everybody. And always remember to take the driver's seat of the car called your life and create this lifetime to your taste. It's our pleasure here at MindGourmet to support you with our food for thought. Bye.